Hey guys, and welcome back for another episode in my history series that can also very much fit under the umbrella of a mystery. This is the Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic, in which a wave of uncontrollable laughter affected several thousand people in Tanganyika over a 1 year period, according to some sources. Other sources cite it lasted anywhere from 6 months to 2.5 years. We've all heard the saying that laughter is contagious, but what if it actually is? Whilst on the face of it this does sound funny, no pun intended, it's said that alongside the laughter the victim suffered with many other symptoms as well: respiratory problems, fainting, crying and rashes. As far as anyone is aware, no one died of this laughter epidemic, but it was a problem that plagued the area for the better part of a year and had huge repercussions on the community. And to this day, no one really knows what caused it. Most experts simply put it down to a case of mass hysteria, but we'll delve deep into that in the episode. I also do want to take a second here just to tell you about my brand new second channel in case you haven't already seen. My history content is slowly going to be making a move over to my second channel over the next couple of months, so if you do enjoy this kind of content, make sure you go over and give my second channel a follow. I would really appreciate it. So, as I said, this took place in Tanganyika, which at this time in 1962 was a sovereign state, but 2 years later it would merge with Zanzibar to become the United Republic of Tanganyika, later becoming known as Tanzania. So we're talking East Africa. Specifically, this epidemic started in the village of Kashasha, near the border of Uganda on the western shore of Lake Victoria, in a small all-girls boarding school run by missionaries. It was the 30th of January 1962 when a small group of girls were all hanging out together after school, chatting, when something made them giggle, probably a joke told by one of the others. The other girls joined in on the laughter, as you do, but only they couldn't stop. What started off as giggles soon turned into hysterical laughter, belly-aching laughs that just wouldn't go away. The story goes that very soon the laughter had spread to the other students, to 95 of the 159 students at the school, and these were all aged between 12 and 18. And laughter wasn't the only symptom they would struggle with. Reports said there was also crying and agitation. Sometimes the laughter would give way to tears, the students clearly distressed, before it would all start up again, seemingly completely out of their control. Some of the girls would faint and report respiratory problems, presumably due to a lack of oxygen reaching the lungs, and some would report pain and rashes. I'm sure that we've all laughed so hard in the past that our chest starts to hurt. Imagine not being able to stop. And the rashes? Well, I don't really have too much of a logical explanation for that. Likely they were just stress rashes. Strangely, the laughter seemed to only affect the students at this school though, with the teachers remaining completely unaffected. These teachers would report that the laughter meant the students weren't able to focus on their lessons and it completely disrupted the school day. This lasted for 48 days, when at that point on March 18th the school was forced to close. And by this point the laughter hadn't just been contained to the school, the whole village of Kashasha would soon find themselves affected. The parents picked their children up from the school and they started laughing. The neighbours would pick up on it and it would just spread from there. Now, of course, this laughter wasn't constant for the better part of the year. It would be literally impossible for the human body to survive like that. And as I said before, nobody died because of this. The laughter would come in waves, occurring in relapses over the months, dispersed with intermittent bouts of crying as well. The laughing and the crying attacks would last for a few hours, and the cycle would repeat for a maximum of 16 days, but on average for about a week. The symptoms would then stop before reoccurring at some point in the future. According to Christian Hempelman, who wrote a whole paper on this called The Laughter of the 1962 Tanganyika Laughter Epidemic, the symptoms of this came in phases. He says that phase 1 began on the 30th of January and ended on the 18th of March, the same day the schools closed. And then there was a lull until the second phase began on the 21st of May, when it seems to me that the schools opened up again, and that lasted through to the end of June. In this second phase, 57 pupils were affected. But of course, it wasn't only the school that was affected. From the end of March through to the end of April, 217 villagers in a local village called Nshamba were affected as well. In mid-June, it spread to 48 students at Ramashenye Girls Middle School, and other areas were also hit as well. For many, life in Tanganyika came to a halt, and it wouldn't go back to normal for quite a while. Hempelman also writes in his paper about a very similar event referred to as running mania that broke out in around the same area. One outbreak happened in Kigezi in July 1963, so over a year later, affecting 600 people. The second was in Mbali in November 1963 with about 300 people. In this case of running mania, people would suffer with aimless running, hyperactivity and violence, spreading once again predominantly amongst students. Years later, in the early 70s, another similar event is noted in another village called Ankola, where 50 students of an all-male primary school showed symptoms of uncontrollable grimacing, vulgar language, aimless walking and laughing. Now, all of this was happening in the same general area. Was it all connected to this laughter epidemic? Is that where it all started? In 2003, Hempelman did an interview with the Chicago Tribune in which he first put down the epidemic to mass hysteria, now more often called mass psychogenic illness, or MPI for short. Psychogenic obviously meaning that this was all in people's heads. Quoting directly from the article, "It's not caused by an element in the environment like food poisoning or a toxin. There is an underlying shared stress factor in the population. It usually occurs in a group of people who don't have a lot of power. MPI is a last resort for people of a low status. It's an easy way for them to express that something is wrong. That may be why it's come to be associated more often with women." MPI is often characterised as having the following aspects. So, an absence of physical findings about organic causes. As the quote just said, it's more often found in girls or women. It's transmitted by sight and sound, is accompanied with hyperventilation thanks to anxiety, is rapid spread and ended, and often goes back to the original setting of the outbreak. And a lot of this does have relevance in the Tanganyika epidemic. In 1962, Tanganyika had just won its independence, and there was a lot of change happening for the people living there. People were generally quite stressed. Female students especially quite suddenly had higher expectations from their teachers and parents, and the MPI theory just suggests they cracked. When word of this laughter epidemic started to spread, people got more stressed because if this happened, you would be unable to work, businesses would shut down, you'd lose out on money, etc. And the stress would then lead you to being more susceptible to picking up the laughter. It's kind of a catch-22 situation. Females apparently were more susceptible because, especially at this time, they were dealing with more societal pressure. I don't need to spell out all the pressures put on women today on a daily basis, let alone in the early 1960s. Women had less autonomy, less power over their own lives. This was also an area that had always been traditionally very tribal, but colonialism meant that suddenly these societies were confronted with the Western way of life, Western religion, Western education, and Western expectations. Even if people didn't realise they were dealing with all of these stresses at the time, the brain would have done somewhere in there, and they would have felt this loss of identity. Could uncontrollable laughter be how it kind of physically manifested? But it is worth noting that there's no actual evidence to back this theory up. It is just that, a theory. Seeing as this laughter epidemic specifically was pretty much contained to this one period of time, there's not really any evidence to study and look into further with this. Hempelman does quote a situation in Lafayette, Indiana at one point though, in which workers at the local DMV were suffering with respiratory distress, to the point that the entire building was eventually relocated. People thought it had something to do with the location, with the building, but testing showed no contaminants, nothing that could have caused this respiratory problem. Hempelman has said that it was just down to being a very bad work environment. Nobody wanted to work at the DMV. There was bad management, and they subconsciously found a way out of the situation, feigning respiratory distress, but they didn't realise that's what they were doing. To this day, apparently, the people involved in this will deny that it was all in their heads, putting it down to bug bites, always saying there must have been an actual reason, a cause, and they will 100% believe that. But Hempelman says that's not the case. Maybe this is what happened to the people of Tanganyika. Stressed and backed into a corner, they wanted time off subconsciously, a reason to relax and remove themselves from the stresses of the world. But as I mentioned, this in itself created stress, so it was very much a catch-22 situation. Whilst MPI is often the leading theory in this case, a lot of people do argue with this, saying attributing this to something akin to hysteria is misogynistic. I mean, you just need to take a very brief look through history to see women with genuine medical complaints over the centuries being fobbed off with just being hysterical and being thrown into asylums, locked up and key thrown away. Is it sexist to say that this was a case of hysteria, seeing as it was majority women who suffered with it? Are people once again just brushing off genuine physical symptoms of a larger undefined problem? This is still something we see in the medical world today. Continually, women's symptoms are brushed off by doctors, and data shows that this is even more prevalent in the case of black women. We might not have seen symptoms like this again, symptoms like the laughter epidemic again in the years since, but there's every chance it could happen again in the future. Could it be there was some kind of bacteria that caused it? I can't help but think back to the dancing plague of 1518. I did an episode on that a couple of years ago, which a lot of people put down to ergo, or ergot, I can't remember how it's pronounced, which is a mould that grew on rye that could cause hallucinations, spasms and tremors. Maybe the sufferers of the laughter epidemic had ingested something that caused these symptoms, something that grew on the local harvest, and it's just never happened again. We have seen illnesses throughout history that do just hit for a small amount of time and then just disappear. I mean, something that immediately springs to my mind here is SARS, which really did have the potential to take over like COVID did, but instead it just faded into obscurity. But then again, could I just be making this argument because there is undeniably a stigma when it comes to mental illness, under which hysteria very much comes under the umbrella? Is there anything wrong with the fact that maybe it was just all in their heads? Hemmelman argues that there are no known viruses or contaminants that lead to the symptoms seen in this case, but I'm sure there are a lot of viruses and contaminants yet to be discovered by humanity. Other people who have looked into this epidemic have simply put it down to the physiology of laughter, which is in its very nature contagious. Maybe that's not just a saying, maybe it really, really is. When you hear someone laughing, you'll often start laughing yourself, whether you mean to or not. Whilst the laughter will be feigned to start with a lot of the time just to make the other person feel comfortable, a lot of the time this does eventually become real, and we all know the saying, laughter is the best medicine. Laughter has been linked to a reduction in stress hormones and increased endorphins, which provide both physical and physiological relief, helping relieve pain, reduce stress, and improve your sense of well-being. For some, this rush of endorphins can become addictive. Maybe subconsciously, the people of Tanganyika were suffering with this laughter epidemic because they just needed an endorphin boost. But again, we have mentioned how the laughter was accompanied with high anxiety, which is kind of counterproductive to the endorphins. The laughter didn't help their situations, it actually made it a lot worse. An article in Psychology Today by Caroline Kamau states that maybe the people laughed just because they could. She writes, "Having travelled to Tanzania, I found it a very friendly and delightful country, with many people helpful towards others, and there is a strong sense of community. Perhaps people laughed because they saw others laughing and because they empathised." Would people really take it that far though? I think that's unlikely. At the end of the day, unless a similar epidemic reappears in modern day, we're unlikely to ever know the true cause. No good records about the Tanganyika epidemic were kept, and a lot of the information we have about it is just word of mouth, so there's no true, reliable information. Maybe it will happen again, maybe it won't. And if it was indeed a mass psychogenic illness, seeing as that is generally a last resort for people in difficult societal situations, I would hope it never returns. But with the way the world currently is, who knows? I would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this one, so please do go and put your thoughts in the comments down below. And don't forget to subscribe to my second channel if you want to continue seeing my history content. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.